actual tangible stuff to talk about. But with training camp underway and the regular season just around the corner, hopefully that is sooner rather than later. But for the time being, we got to make with what we have, eh?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I made the Habs Blitz section earlier, and I didn't have much to talk about either because, well, our guys are so freaking good that they talk about everything already. So let's talk about the little things. And I'm guessing, which is funny because I talked about crowd capacity due to COVID, but we're going to be talking about COVID as well. And the increasing number of players that are unvaccinated and are being outright benched, so to speak. They're not going to be able to play. I mean, like, what's the story with that?
Well, I mean, there's several, right? I mean, I think the most polarizing one is Zach Ronaldo because he was just flat out told that he was not allowed to come to training camp from the Columbus Blue Jackets. And he's been very outspoken about, I believe he was at like PPC rallies and this and that, like heavy anti-vaxxer. So I don't think that he's going to have a future in the NHL. Then you move on to a guy like Tyler Bertuzzi, where it's more just, I mean, it's more on the quiet front, but he's just been told that he won't be able to play games in Canada. You also get the same situation with the guy by the name, I believe it's Bode Wild, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Hopefully I am.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, with the Islanders, that he's in a similar predicament, especially with Lou Lamoriello. You have to imagine that's not going to go over too well. And then you get the situation in Edmonton where Duncan Keith held out for as long as he could, finally did get it, and I believe he will be back with the club this week, if I'm not mistaken, after his quarantine is done. But they also have a player by the name of Josh Archibald who is not getting vaccinated. And if you're a player on a Canadian team, you're probably going to miss more than half the amount of games because of how often you're going over the border and such. So I mean, I respect everyone's right to choose, but in this particular situation, you really are kind of rolling the dice on your career.
Yeah, you really are, especially considering that the NHL is the only major sports league in North America that are literally banning players from crossing the border if they're not vaccinated. Well, at least going into Canada, at least Major League Baseball and the NBA, they don't care. It's just as long as you're not sick and everything. And well, the Canadians were also affected for that matter in a certain way with Jesse Ylönen, who came in from Europe, went into quarantine, was not vaccinated, and he had to miss games because of that. And as a prospect, it doesn't make you look good for that matter. I mean, he did eventually, agree to it, but I mean, I understand that it's personal opinion and everything, but when this is your career we're talking about. It's not just say, if it doesn't work out, I'll do something else. Like, no, man, this is it. This is the apogee of your career, and you're trying to make those millions of dollars and playing in the NHL. So it doesn't look that tangible for everyone to do that. But I mean, it is what it is, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. And I think the problem that a lot of these players are running into, and I can't really speak to the other leagues like the NBA and the NFL with how many players have been vaccinated. But if I'm not mistaken, it's less than 15 players in the NHL that have been vaccinated. So
the list is very small, yeah.
So you're really putting yourself on an island here when you're in this small percentage of players that are refusing to be vaccinated, especially when you're not a big name player. Like, obviously, let's just say, for argument's sake, Nathan McKinnon chooses not to get vaccinated. Yeah. They're probably going to find a way to get around that. But when you're like a prospect or a Josh Archibald or Zach Ronaldo who's teetering on the brink of no longer being in the NHL, you're almost asking for it. And look, like I said, personal choice. I'm not going to tell someone what they should and shouldn't put in their body. But at the same time, given the circumstances, it really is kind of playing with fire here in terms of your career.
That being said, though, there is one player that's making the rounds of the news for all kinds of reasons. And although he is vaccinated, he apparently broke COVID protocols, and that's Evander Kane. Dude, this guy's been in the news for all the wrong reasons recently. What do you got to say about him?
You know what? It's so sad, right? Because Evander Kane, I think in a lot of ways is a unicorn, like a power forward, good player, could pretty much play in every situation, great shot, great, like could stand up, hit, fight. I love Evander Kane as a player, but it just seems like ever since he made it to the NHL, originally drafted by the Atlanta Thrashers and later on the Winnipeg Jets, he just cannot keep his name out of the negative attention wheel. And I thought they kind of solved that when he went to San Jose and he got there, and there was that strong leadership group of guys like, I believe Dan Boyle was still there, Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau, Joe Pavelski. And you thought that maybe he'd finally turned a quarter after his infamous departure from Buffalo and the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah.
But now with his strange wife and the gambling accusations, although they have deemed to be unfounded in terms of him betting on NHL games, you just can't help but feel like he's kind of the situation is coming to a head, for lack of better terms. There's been rumblings that the San Jose Sharks don't want him back in the locker room. And for a team that's kind of fast tracking inevitably towards a rebuild, you don't really want to have a problem guy in that room. And look, again, like, I don't like to kind of speak out of turn and pretend to know what is going on behind the scenes when I don't have a source. And on this particular information, I know more than you or anyone else listening.
Yeah.
But at the same time, from an outsider's perspective, you just have to think that sooner or later he's going to have to maybe get some rehabilitation, see someone, just try and figure this out, because it'd be such a shame if his career ended on such a sour note, because at the end of the day, he is a very good hockey player.
And he's only 30 years old, so he still has a couple of great seasons in front of him if, again, he stays out of trouble and he stays healthy and everything. And like you said, he's such a complete player. It's awful, great player, horrible personality. What can we say, right? On that note, we weren't supposed to talk about this, Anthony, but you know what? I mean, I'm not to be disrespectful. I kind of forgot about it because it has been a few days ago. Doug Armstrong, general manager for the St. Louis Blues, signed a 5-year contract extension that runs through 25-26. Armstrong, of course, was a centerpiece for the Blues winning the Cup in 2019, and has been named for as general manager of the Canada men's ice hockey team that will be competing in 2022 in Beijing. I'm actually going to ask you two questions, Anthony. The first one is what your thoughts on extending Doug Armstrong, deserved or not, etc. But also that little news that they also hired Peter Chiarelli in the front office, and now people are like, oh, he's going to be the guy who's going to replace Armstrong after his contract is up. I mean, that's just bogus, right?
Yeah, of course. So look, on Doug Armstrong, Bill is his brother in the desert. I think that Doug Armstrong is quietly one of the best general managers in the NHL, and he did not get the recognition he truly deserved until he won the Stanley Cup in 2019. He was the architect of the Canada men's hockey team at the World Cup of Hockey in 2016. As you mentioned, he's going to double down on that this year at the Olympics. But another funny fact about Doug Armstrong that doesn't get talked about a lot is, since he's become the general manager of the St. Louis Blues, and I believe he got hired back in 2009, the Blues are the only team to have never exercised a buyout, a regular buyout or a compliance buyout that every team got two of following the lockout in 2012. And that's really a testament to how good he is at signing contracts. And he's always been a guy that does not get tied into quote unquote bad contracts about paying players for what they've done as opposed for what they're going to do. You saw him walk away from David Backes in 2016, the former face of the franchise, because Backes got, I believe it was 5 years at $6 million from the Boston Bruins. You saw him walk away from Alex Pietrangelo last summer or last fall, whenever the offseason was following the COVID season. And I mean, he's a guy that isn't afraid to make tough decisions. And I think that it's a real testament to what he's done with St. Louis, because when he took over that team following the years of McInnes and Pronger and the first rodeo of Keith Tkachuk, that team really became irrelevant. Like, I remember following the lockout in 2005, no one really talked about the St. Louis Blues. They got Paul Correa for a bit, but I mean, I think he has just done a phenomenal job there. I've loved what he's done ever since, let's say, following the 2012 lockout. I thought that they were long past due to win a Stanley Cup, but he's not afraid to make bold changes. Like, he brought in the entire center group leading into that Stanley Cup championship victory from outside the organization. He traded for Shen, he traded for Ryan O'Reilly, and he signed Tyler Bozak. So I have a lot of time for Doug Armstrong. Obviously a subjective opinion, but he is my favorite general manager in the NHL, maybe aside from Steve Yzerman. But I think it's well-deserved president as well, in addition to being the general manager. And in regards to Peter Chiarelli, it's such a polarizing name, right? Because of what went on in the later years in Boston and obviously his infamous tenure in Edmonton. But I think what people have to realize is that Peter Chiarelli brings value to a front office when he's not the decision maker. And if you look at his track record when he's not the guy making the final decisions, it is fairly good. I don't think this is kind of Chiarelli is brought in to be the successor to Armstrong. I don't think the Blues are looking that far ahead. But let's say even if he was, you would still have Armstrong holding the title as president. And, I think that's kind of like what happened with Chiarelli in the later years in Boston, where you had Cam Neely looking over his shoulder, as opposed to his final years in Edmonton. I think Kevin Lowe was president, but he was kind of hands off by that point. But look, I don't think he's going to be the successor to Doug Armstrong. I don't think the Blues are looking that far ahead. But I also see the value in bringing him in as just kind of like a voice in the room when he's not the final decision maker. So I guess to summarize it, if Doug Armstrong thinks that hiring Peter Chiarelli is the right decision, then I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, because I believe he's earned that over the last 10 or 11 years or so.
Yeah, which is something that we've seen very often in the NHL. I mean, like there were, like we made all the Peter Chiarelli jokes when he was in Edmonton, but I think that was one of the biggest issues over with the Oilers, is that the heart of the front office was just what the locals would call the old boys club, so to speak. All those ex-Oilers players that were just hanging around for an extra paycheck and not really doing all that much. And again, Kevin Lowe was put in a position where he had too much power to handle. And then Peter Chiarelli is someone who, if he is his entourage is strong, well, then he'll make the right decisions. And we saw that a little bit of that weakness when he was in Boston during that Tyler Seguin trade. There's videos out on YouTube for those interested of him working the phones and being like, all right, we don't like it, we're trading him. And then he just picks up the phone and is like, I'm doing this. And everyone's looking at it being like, okay. There was no one that actually had the cojones to stand up and be like, no, man, you're making a mistake. We have to hold on to this guy, so to speak. So maybe putting him in a position where he doesn't have the final say might actually make the team stronger. And especially with a mind like Doug Armstrong's, like the presentations can be made. He'll be a yes, this works, great idea, or no, this makes absolutely no sense. Get out of here. And that's the end of that. So to be continued, but I agree with you, Anthony, that maybe short of Steve Yzerman, Doug Armstrong is probably the best general manager in the league. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, I pulled out while you were talking, I pulled out Cap Friendly, and July 1st, 2018 is something that will go down in infamy for the Buffalo Sabres, when they traded Ryan O'Reilly to the Blues in return for Patrick Berglund, Vladimir Sobotka, Tage Thompson, a conditional first-round pick, which ended up being Ryan Johnson, and a 2021 second-round pick being Ben Roger. I mean, this is going to go down as being maybe one of the biggest steals in history, if that matters.
Oh, for sure. And, I mean, the amount of, cojones, for lack of better terms, it took to walk away from Alex Pietrangelo, who in my mind is a top 5 defenseman in the NHL.
Yep.
That takes some courage, right? Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, just for lack of a better term, yeah.
And, he even, I remember in the summer of 2019, following the Cup championship, he trades and then immediately extends Justin Falk as a fallback option in case they wouldn't be able to hammer out a deal with Pietrangelo. Mm-hmm. So he thinks long-term, and maybe people call him being unloyal, but, it's a cutthroat business, and good on him for making the tough decisions.
Yeah, because we're in a salary cap era, and that's what you need to do. You need to make the decisions on what's best for the team. And as good as Pietrangelo is, maybe, Armstrong is looking at his team and is like, am I going to commit $9 million a year for my captain when I have all these rookies coming up and everything. Because I don't know about you, but